Here we are. This is Wesley Shantz, and I believe we have all the things working. Well, this is our discussion of video games and some of the books that are related to them. That's my background right now, it looks like. Yeah, has the title Beyond a Boundary. I'm going to explain how we got here because I know that a week 2 weeks ago, we were planning to meet and talk about the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. That's this one here. And I really uh, forgot a couple of things when I was planning that. The first thing I forgot was that it was Labor Day here in the US, and I would not be available to actually um, do the thing I had said I would, and I wasn't there to talk on Twitch for a half hour or so like I do every 2 weeks. And that might seem like a small thing, but I really try to basically uh, show up when I say I will. So I'm sorry about that. Um, but moving on and doing our best to get back on track. Um, Last month we had been talking about one James, William James, the American philosopher, psychologist, um, and this week, month, I suppose, we're looking at another James, C.L.R. James, the scholar and author of the Caribbean and particularly of the Black experience there. He is most famous, perhaps, for his history of the Haitian Revolution, titled Black Jacobins. I haven't read that one, but I have read another book, this Beyond a Boundary, in which he discusses more of an autobiographical um, approach to the game of cricket, of all things. And again, you might still be wondering, why are we talking about this book? I'm going to explain right now. From William James, I'd intended to move into the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass as another critical uh, foundational text in my formation as a teacher and one I'd wanted to share with other teachers and students. Um, this is a book about learning to read and about the practice of freedom. And thus, I think it makes for really interesting discussions of those two things when it comes to games and whatever else you might be interested in doing with your education, I suppose. So for me, my hobby right now is video games, but my profession right now is teaching. And so I try to find ways to blend and combine those two things and balance those two things. This book is one that I used to teach at the charter school down in Phoenix, and one that I have read and reread a number of times. In it, Frederick Douglass, of course, makes his way out of slavery, and he does so as he describes it, at least partly through a process of coming to awaken and coming to a sense of himself as a person through learning to read, through gaining the skills of literacy, which are at that time denied to him and to many people. Um, so that's one thread here. Um, I think it connects really nicely in with our discussion of William James, and I hope that you've had a chance to check out those books of his, especially the talks to teachers. But as I was looking at my copy of this book, and I've got it here, and I've got it on the screen, you can see the borrow's unavailable, so I'll just have to read this to you. But the first thing I saw just really struck me because I don't think I've actually read the introduction to this copy that I've been reading for years, or at least I haven't read it very carefully in some time now. I went back to it, and it says this. This is the introduction. This is by Houston A. Baker, Jr. Describing the generative conditions for American abolitionism, the social and political theorist C.L.R. James writes, history really moves when the traditionally most civilized section of the population in this case New Englanders representing the longest American line of lawful sovereignty, joins as co-equals with those without whose labor society could not exist for a day, in this case the plantation chattel. Otherwise, history stays pretty much the same, or worse yet, repeats itself. Okay. The long quote there, the long sentence, it's quite an intricate and nicely balanced one, um, is from C.L.R. James from a essay, piece on the transatlantic slave trade. Um, he's discussing the connection between our uh, text from last month, that is, William James is certainly a part of that New England, um, although a bit later in time, right? But that New England civilization, as he calls it, the most civilized strand of American society at the time. Um, he's a descendant of that, and his predecessors, and Baker here lists the likes of Thoreau and Emerson, William Lloyd Garrison, Harriet Beecher Stowe, um, all of whom were important in promoting what becomes the abolitionist movement. Um, but I think the point that Baker is making is that that's a traditional narrative and one that James is seeking to provide some context for, some nuance for in his discussion. Um, so let's by all means follow that lead, because if William James leads us to Frederick Douglass, then we should follow the thread from Frederick Douglass here over to C.L.R. James. And I hope that this is one I am able to borrow, and I hope that I can give you just a little flavor of C.L.R. James's style here in Beyond a Boundary. So, mhm, scrolling into the book, there's the dedication, our contents, acknowledgments. All right. The preface: this book is neither cricket reminiscences nor autobiography. It poses the question, what do they know of cricket who only cricket know? To answer involves ideas as well as facts. So while there is an autobiographical element to this and there is a discussion of cricket, here's what it actually is. Um, it is about ideas, ideas that originated in the West Indies, but that come to their fruition as James travels to England and involves himself again in social and political thought there. He quotes here, or rather plays on another quote here, to establish his own identity, Caliban, after 3 centuries, must himself pioneer into regions Caesar never knew. So aligning himself there with Shakespeare and the characters of Caliban and Caesar. Um, we will not be tracking those paths right now, but of course, James is writing for a highly literate audience here, one which would be familiar with those cultural touchstones. Let's do our best, though, to hang with him into the opening of his book, appropriately, The Window, A Window to the World. Tunapuna, at the beginning of this century, was a small town of about 3,000 inhabitants, situated 8 miles along the road from the Port of Spain, the capital city of Trinidad. Like all towns and villages on the island, it possessed a recreation ground. Recreation meant cricket, for in those days, except for infrequent athletic sport meetings, cricket was the only game. Our house was superbly situated exactly behind the wicket. A huge tree on one side and another house on the other limited the view of the ground, but an umpire could have stood at the bedroom window. By standing on a chair, a small boy of 6 could watch practice every afternoon, matches on Saturdays. With matting, one pitch could and often did serve for both um, practice and matches. From the chair he could also mount onto the windowsill and so stretch a groping hand for the books on top of the wardrobe. Thus the early pattern of my life was set. The traffic on the road was heavy. There was no fence between the front yard and the street. I was an adventurous little boy, and so my grandmother and my two aunts, with whom I lived for half the year, the rainy season, preferred me in the backyard or in the house where they could keep an eye on me. When I tired of playing in the yard, I perched myself on the chair by the window. I doubt if for some years I knew what I was looking at in detail, but this watching from the window shaped some of my strongest early impressions of personality and society. So then he goes on to describe this neighbor, Matthew Bondman. But we get the dynamic there. Again, on the one hand, the game of cricket, the only game in town. On the other hand, the books. These are framing his early life, the pattern of his life, he says. Um, we are going to see in this some sort of window onto the connection between books and cricket. And again, it's a book at least partly about cricket, partly about his life, his home, his origins. But of course, he is talking about ideas fundamentally here, ideas, and not so different from the ideas that Frederick Douglass is interested in, ideas of freedom, of, um, in James's case, who gets to define freedom and write history. Um, it's an incredible book. I'll say just a little more about it before we move back to Frederick Douglass here. Um, and that is to say how I did come upon it and how I would recommend placing it in a context for those who are interested um, in these connections between games and ideas. There is a wonderful podcast out there, the Game Studies Study Buddies. That's right. The Game Studies Study Buddies podcast is a couple of professors, academics, scholars, and their names Michael Lutz and Cameron Kunzelman. They get together about once a month and record a discussion of a book, a game studies book. And it's really remarkable insights and analysis that they give. Their perspective on things comes from within the academic field, and they're speaking to a general audience. Again, a highly literate general audience, but people who don't need to know so much about academics or game studies in specific to follow. Um, I think if you are interested in video games and if you like reading books, it would be one to check out. I'd highly recommend it. And you might start with their episode on Beyond a Boundary, the C.L.R. James book. That's how I heard about that book. That's why I picked it up and read it. And that, of course, is since I've um, since I last read the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. And so when I looked at this again, I saw another um, aspect of it, another piece of it that I had not known before because I wasn't as familiar then with C.L.R. James. So all this to say, in a long-winded fashion, it's not just about reading these books once. It's absolutely a matter of reading and rereading and noticing the ways in which books and authors are in conversation with one another, even if it is a just an introduction, something someone has attached to the front of the book. It can certainly shed new light on that text for you, or at least it did for me in this case. So, with all that said, let's find a copy of this that I can open. The portable Frederick Douglass, not quite what I'm looking for. I think one of these was the Dover edition that we were looking at last time. I wonder if it will work. Let's try this one. Hmm, we can't borrow that one. I wonder what's going on with the archive. I have never seen so many books that say borrow unavailable. They are having some issues. Oh, I wonder if this one will work. Yeah, this one will work. Okay. So this is an omnibus or an anthology of a series of autobiographies that Douglass has put out over the years, collected by the Library of Congress. Great edition. Um, a little bit daunting in that it's 1160 pages long. So we'll probably just need to jump through here a little bit. I'm assuming that the first part of this is going to be some sort of intro. We'll just skip that for now to get to his text. Yeah. So his first autobiography, The Narrative of Life, released in the year 1845. So we're a generation or two before William James. We're 20 years before the American Civil War. Um, it's introduced by some of these white abolitionists, such as Wendell Phillips, um, to present him to an audience of presumably, again, at that time, white readers. Um, but look at how Frederick Douglass starts out his autobiography, or as he calls it, his narrative. Again, with a place. We're situated this time in a part of Maryland. That's where I'm from, Maryland, and that's where I went to college. How I got connected with Signum University before there was such thing, when there was just Corey Olson, not yet the Tolkien professor, but getting his way there. Um, so I was born in Tuckahoe near Hillsborough, and about 12 miles from Easton in Talbot County, Maryland. I have no accurate knowledge of my age, never having seen any authentic record containing it. By far the larger part of the slaves know as little of their ages as horses know of theirs, and it is the wish of most masters within my knowledge to keep their slaves thus ignorant. I do not remember to have ever met a slave who could tell of his birthday. They seldom come nearer to it than planting time, harvest time, cherry time, springtime, or fall time. A want of information concerning my own was a source of unhappiness to me, even during childhood. The white children could tell their ages. I could not tell why I ought to be deprived of the same privilege. I was not allowed to make any inquiries of my master concerning it. He deemed all such inquiries on the part of a slave improper and impertinent, and evidence of a restless spirit. Oh, sorry, I thought I was scrolling down, but whoa! Hey, okay, so that's not doing what I think it's doing. It's moving this cursor down here. Gosh, sorry about that. Okay, so from the outset, although we're situated in a place, it's not described in the way CLR James does. We don't have a home per se given to us other than the general location. Wow, this is frustrating. And what's called to our attention right there is our our lack of a location in time. Uh, the sense in which this is of its time, this this text, and yet the author is bereft, is unable to situate with certainty his own age or his own birthday. Um, from the beginning, the idea that is coming out for us here is the importance of knowledge and the way in which knowledge is kept from this young person. Frederick Douglass um, feels this even as a child. And well, so I'm thinking now about the way that that would shape a child growing up. And he describes there his interactions with other children, white children in this case, and with his master. Um, to think of a time in which such an important and such a personal piece of knowledge was kept from someone um, feels feels very different from the world that we're in today, in uh, especially in educational setting, where I think inquiries, far from being evidence of a restless spirit, are very much welcomed, at least in most schools. And so, um, thinking about what this text and the ideas in it could say to us now, perhaps is a matter of reflecting on what kinds of questions are considered improper for children to ask. What kinds of questions, what kinds of knowledge are considered dangerous or evidence of some problem with a child? Um, this is once again becoming a political and social question. Um, this year and in recent years, the number of books that have been banned or requests for books to be banned has increased enormously. Um, and there are certain patterns to which books people are trying to have banned and removed from libraries. Um, there are certainly still questions and topics of conversation that kids can bring up in a school setting or outside a school setting that are considered improper for them. Um, and we might just think about why that is. What is it about those things? Um, this idea of knowledge, of as CLR James puts it, the boundary around the recreation ground, um, describing cricket, but also, of course, describing again who gets to set the limits of the conversation, who gets to circumscribe the history within certain boundaries. Those are things that um, in our daily lives we can perceive if we try. They remain invisible some of the time, but you can start to notice them, can start to think about them. So um, this has shifted a bit from the approach I was going to take today. Again, I was assuming that people might be interested in seeing a more immediate connection to games. Um, again, just going off of things that I'm interested in and trying to share them with y'all. That's why I bring up Beyond a Boundary by CLR James. It's a longer text, but not so long. The Narrative of the Life, relatively short book, but of course only one of Frederick Douglass's autobiographies. A good one to start with, um, but certainly do your best with reading either or both of these books in the coming couple of weeks. This is me preparing to sign off here. It doesn't look like we have any questions in the chat unless I guess I'm looking at one thing here. Oh, there's the other thing. Okay. Yeah, I think we're doing all right. So without further ado, if you do have questions, comments about these couple of books, send them our way through the Signum University website, and the general email there will do the trick. Um, if you're interested in other things going on at Signum, if you were expecting to see the Tolkien professor here, uh, do check back with us. Check out the website and see what else is going on Twitch and elsewhere. Um, we have a lot of exciting developments, both within the university and the space program. Of course, this is the sole remnant for the moment of what was the academy. And again, this is geared more towards teachers rather than students so much. But before I do sign off, for any students who are out there, and we're hoping to hear about Earthbound today, again, I apologize. This thread was kind of exciting to me. I wanted to follow up on it while it was fresh. And we will get back into more of Frederick Douglass and more of Earthbound next time. Uh, from Beyond a Boundary, back through the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, and into Earthbound for the first Monday. I say carefully, looking at my calendar, I think that we can do the first Monday of October. It is Monday, October 2nd, and it looks clear. Okay. Thanks everyone for tuning in, watching. Um, I hope that the start of the school year is going okay for you, and I look forward to talking to you again in a couple of weeks. So, till then, happy reading and take care.